Welcome to Wednesday Live. Thank you for joining us live or on replay. We're so grateful that you're here. And today we have another special guest. We've got Alicia Daugherty here. She's the founder and principal of Alicia Daugherty Coaching. And we're going to cover a lot of great topics today, like how to be creative, resourceful, and whole. We're also going to talk about how to have a support system and maintain resilience, build resilience, and how to define success, which is something I think all of us need to do. And then what Alicia is also going to teach us is about how everybody has a story. And we're going to hear a bit about her story. So welcome, Alicia.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Great. I'm so happy that you're here too. And as much as we have a lot to cover, we also are open to questions that are on your mind. And we've got Robin who's with us. She said she's so glad that she can be here to see her amazing sister-in-law. Thanks for being here, Robin. We're so grateful you're here too. And you're right, she is amazing. And Nani's telling us that she's welcoming everybody and encouraging questions. So whatever platform you're joining us on, please engage with us. So Alicia, you've got a robust story. Speaking of everybody's got a story. Let's start there.
Okay. So I guess let's talk about how I got where I am, because it's not a place, frankly, if you had asked me 6 months ago where I'd be, it would not be here. So
right.
I'd say my path to getting me to starting my own coaching practice started probably about 20 years ago. I had the opportunity to work with an executive coach while I was a director at Pico. I was sort of on the hypo path. I had all kinds of development opportunities, and one was working with an executive coach. And working with her had such an impact on me personally and professionally that at that time I said, I want to do that for other people. That's what I want to do. So I carried around this story for over a decade. When I retire, I'm going to become an executive coach. And
I remember you saying that to me at a mentoring session years ago.
Yes, yeah. And I just always had that in the back of my head, and that would be part of my story I would tell. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to attend the Betsy Magnus Leadership Institute, which I know you are one of my Betsy sisters. Shout out to class 3-3 if you're on. And you know, the first week of that experience is so profound. There's so much learning. You're getting a ton of feedback. You're getting to know people that are going to become like your family. And I would tell my story and say, and when I retire, I'm going to be an executive coach. And a couple of the women in my class said, what are you waiting for? And I was like, oh, well, I have to finish working. I have to do these things. Well, why do you have to? If it's what you want to do, why don't you move forward and embrace it? And so that's when I started to think, well, maybe I shouldn't wait. Maybe I should prepare myself. I'm still going to work for several more years, but start the process now so I can hit the ground running when it's really time to retire. Yeah. So I danced around that for about a year. Another dear friend from Betsy sat me down and said, look, this is great. You keep talking about this. Now, are you going to do it? Because frankly, she would start hearing about it. And so the next day I signed up for training with the CoActive Training Institute. That was last fall. And the training just had a profound impact on me. And number one, just learning what I was actually talking about when I said I want to be a coach. Because I think a lot of us as leaders, we're coaching all the time, right? We're giving people feedback, we're helping them improve. But the practice of professional coaching is something different from what I understood it to be and from what a lot of people do. And so getting immersed in that, really learning it, and then being coached through my classes, through my coach that I hired, has just had such a profound impact on me that I really started thinking this really is a thing. It's really something that I'm not just thinking about or wanting to do. It's something that I'm actually going to do. And we had a plan. My husband and I had planned I would be retiring in 2024 and, maybe starting coaching as a side hustle. And things were going along, and then the pandemic hit and everything changed, right? My 4 hours a day of commuting time went to 0. Wow. So I had a lot more time to focus on building my capabilities, thinking about what I really wanted to do, and really focusing on what is my life? What do I want to do with my life? In the midst of that, my father had a stroke. He's fine. He's doing okay. Wow. But it really sort of made me pause and think, life is short. and you never know. And so what's the cost of continuing to work versus the value, right? So I really had to think about what am I doing here? And I had actually a unique opportunity in my role at Comcast. The group that I was leading, some different things were changing, different projects were becoming much more critical because of the pandemic. And so I had the opportunity to kind of reframe what my team was doing. And my boss kind of said, come back and let me know what you think it ought to be. And I sat there with a blank sheet of paper trying to figure out what I could get excited about for the next 4 years. And I just couldn't. It just wasn't in me. It's great work and there's a lot to be done, but there was nothing that was calling me. And I thought, now's the time to take this step. And I know that it's right. And the crazy part, Shannon, and you and I talked about this, I kept waiting for this like panic and fear and doubt after I told him, I don't think I want to be here anymore. And none of it. I haven't had a moment of fear or doubt or panic, which just tells me that's the right.
I love that. And so many times we just want like a sign on the wall or skywriting or something so clear, like this is what you should do. But I really think you get that sign through the sense of peace that you feel, right? So here your boss is saying to you, Alicia, go, create this org, what you're going to work on for the next 4 years. And you came back with an org chart that excluded you.
Basically, yes. Yeah.
I love it.
And he was shocked, but fully supportive. He understood what I was saying. And I had so much wonderful support from people all over Comcast who were in a position to tell me no, who were in a position to say, well, there are things that you need to do here. But ultimately it was my decision and absolutely the right one for me.
Oh, that's amazing. I love it. And look who we have with us.
Edwidge.
Yes. She's getting her coffee and she's ready to get her power hour on. Nice.
Yeah.
So a couple questions are coming up in my mind already. And for those who are engaging with us, let us know what's on your mind. One of them is, what made you choose CoActive Coaching, and what is it about their model that was so appealing to you? Because there's a lot of choices now.
Yeah, there are. Thank you. That's a great question. So I did research a lot of different programs. And what I really liked about CoActive is it's very much focused. The name CoActive is sort of the partnership and the being together, and the active is the doing. So it really is a balance of being and doing. There's a lot that working with a client, we just sort of learn about what's going on right now inside here, and then what are we going to do about it? And so I really liked that mix. I really liked the model you mentioned about naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That's one of the cornerstones, is that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. We don't have to give them anything. We don't have to do for them. We don't have to take care of them. Yeah. We just have to help them understand their greatness and their power. And then from a very practical standpoint, the other thing was there was a lot of flexibility. And I think there are other courses that allow that as well, but I was able to sort of pick and choose my schedule and my pace. I could do it over weekends, so I didn't have to burn vacation time. I took a day, one day a month.
Compete in your home brewing competitions, which we must hear. Good.
Yeah. And then I did go to they have an initial session where you go check it out and then decide, like, is this something that I want to invest in? Absolutely. It was the right program for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And just so everybody can let that sink in, the words that she's saying is creative, resourceful, and whole. Like, and I think when we go through vibe and other exercises and we talk about I am statements, all of us to just sit here. Do you have something?
There's vibe.
There we go. So the B in vibe is beliefs, so I am creative, I am resourceful, I am whole. Like for all of us to just take that in, because it required you to be those things already for you to take this leap. And I think it's very just rewarding and full circle for us to see how that has manifested in what you're capable of, and what you just completed before this conversation right now is.
Yeah. So this was my final. So the certification process for CTI is pretty robust. And one of the elements is 6 separate supervision sessions where a trained coach supervisor listens to a session that I've done and tells me how I did. And it can be very daunting and intimidating. But I finished my last one this morning and got very high marks from my supervisor. I'm done.
So
I'm done.
proud of you. I'm not the only one.
Yeah, that was a really good feeling. So it could have gone either way, Shannon. I'm telling you.
Yeah, well, probably.
I might have had to compose myself, but no, it was.
I've known you a long time, and you are.
Julie.
Julie's with us too, and she's also proud of you. Yes.
And I'm proud of Julie as well. She's been an amazing partner for my time at Comcast headquarters and ongoing.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about building relationships. And I think we should talk about, having like your personal board of directors or like the people that you rely on for connection and advice and to provide advice. And you get to keep those relationships. So I'm sure you're still friends with those from Pico, and you've got your collection of great relationships from Comcast, and now you're creating more relationships out in the world and the work that you're doing. I think that's a great thing to recognize.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, my husband laughs at me because if I've got a Zoom happy hour, which might happen on occasion, and I'll say it's with the ladies, he's like, okay, which ladies? And I realize I have like all these different circles and tribes, but you sort of connect with people, and it's that connection that gives you, I think, the safety net to be able to just let loose and say, am I crazy? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? Because nobody else is telling me today. But also something, people to share the joy with and share the abundance, and really, people that have your back. So I've been very, very blessed in a lot of different areas of my life to have wonderful groups of women. I do have men friends, and but it is something about these circles of women that formed is very, very powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. That support system, everybody needs that. And I also feel like you get what you give, right? So when you are being transparent and vulnerable and real with people, that enables them to understand you, and like your Betsy classmates. And for those who are not familiar with Betsy Magnus, it's a leadership development program in the cable industry that's run by WICT, which is Women in Cable Telecommunications. And people get nominated to participate in this. And then you're in a group of like 30 people, and you do a lot of self-reflection and assessments and that type of thing at the Center for Creative Leadership, which is totally challenging, but so essential to get further, to understand yourself in both the ways in which you can use your strengths and the things that we could all work on.
Yeah.
So for those who are joining us and saying, I don't really have a support system like that, or I don't think I do, or like, why is that important to me? Just what are some reasons why you think that having those support systems are so important?
Well, I think a lot of times you might know what it is that you want, but are afraid to say it. Or you might think something is a great idea, but the risk of saying it out loud might just be too profound, right? So having a group of people that you can really say anything to and say, tell me if this is crazy, or tell me what'll happen if I do this, or tell me what'll happen if I don't, and just having that freedom and being able to let loose, be candid, and support each other. And it's always, even if we're, all have, there have been, I won't go into detail, but situations where the whole circle is just pissed about whatever is the thing, and we're in there like, and then we get done, and then we say, okay, now what? Now what? Where do we go? And it's not just wallowing, but it's bringing it forth, and not just telling me all the time that I'm perfect, but telling me what's really happening that other people may not be willing or able to tell me, right? So, and there's just something in the human condition about connection, right? We all need connection, and some of the folks that I've connected with over time, it's just been happenstance. It's just we sat together in a training classroom and realized how much we had in common. Our offices were down the hall. We had a funny conversation in a ladies' room, or but just make a connection. Do a virtual coffee, right? Just like, I really enjoyed talking with you. I heard that funny thing you said in the next stall. Can I hit you up? We'll have coffee. It's just, you just don't know. But
that willingness to reach out and make a connection too. I think that's so important, because I think very often we feel that way, like, oh, this person's interesting, or I'd love to learn more about them or anything like that. But very often we don't take that next step. So I love that you do that.
Yeah.
I think that what you're describing is proactive.
I used to be really, I'm sorry, I used to be really intimidated. Like people would say, reach out, network, just invite someone. And I would think like, oh, how am I going to do that? They're going to laugh at me. But being on the receiving end of that, I've never once laughed at somebody for introducing themselves and wanted to have coffee. I've never once thought anything but, oh, wow, it's flattering, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
It's just, if it's genuine and it's natural, and it is about the connection. Certainly connections can turn into something that someone becomes an advocate, someone becomes a sponsor. There are things that can evolve from that, but that initial connection, we're just people, right? That's the fun part.
Right. And I think that reminder that you have nothing to lose other than what you could learn from that person, how that exchange could be. Like there may not be anything that goes on beyond that, and that's totally okay.
Yep.
That you could lose the opportunity to connect and learn. So I think sometimes we think the other way, where like I could be rejected, or I could feel like, they might say, why would I want to talk to you? But people don't say that. People say, I might be busy. Let's find time, as soon as we can. So I think that's a really good encouragement for us. So for many of us joining today, we're thinking, my gosh, this woman is so courageous, and you felt this in your heart for years, 20 years, you said, something that's been calling you, and then you had the courage to go and do it. So what would be some of the things that we could seek in our own lives to give ourselves either that level of clarity, because I think that's something that many of us are missing, or that courage to just take the leap? Like I think one of the pieces or the ingredients in your recipe is the support system. What are some other ingredients?
Yeah. Well, I think a big one is really truly understanding what is it that you want? What do you envision for your life? If you look 40 years down the road and you're sitting there looking out over your life and what you've done and what you've had and where you've been, what do you see? What resonates with you? And then how do you create that? And it doesn't have to mean, so I've been thinking and talking with a lot of people recently about courage, and it doesn't have to mean a big, huge job change, right? It could mean raising your hand for a project that maybe you don't have the full background in. It could be courage in the form of asking for help when you're underwater, and that's not always rewarded in an organization, but to have the courage to stand up and say, I need help, who's going to give it to me? So it can be those micro moments, or it can be a major, change in life. And I know a lot of people, especially in this time, are making those choices because they've had the time to slow down, think about what's really important. And I think really defining success for yourself and taking it out of the construct that we've all been trained in of what it means to be successful, a dollar amount, a title, a number of people on your org chart, all these different things that in an organization tend to be equated to success. What at the end of the day is going to be different for me? What at the end of my life is going to have meaning for me? And what inspires me? What brings me joy? What do I wake up every morning wanting to do? And then find the path, find the way to do it.
Yeah, that's great. So like taking this time now in quarantine to allow yourself to be self-reflective, to think about that long-term aspect of things, to question, what do I love? What makes me come alive? Where do I find it not hard work? Like it's just things that you would do anyway. Like I found that with you in mentoring. You've been a volunteer mentor in the Women in Cable Cable Telecommunications program in Philadelphia for years. Yeah. And you always have those circles and the partnerships where it's like, everybody's like, we have a plan, we have goals, everybody's sharing, that you're just like humming right along, because I think it's just something that you do. It's just who you are. So it looks like you found a career that really aligned with who you are organically and authentically.
Yeah. It definitely feels that way sitting where I am right now. Yeah.
Right. So for us to do that self-reflection and that thought process. And I think for those who have become more clear about what that might mean for them, be that a small step or a big step, like you're saying, like the courage, like you get credit for courage, regardless of how, quantum it is. Then you're saying to just take that step. Like what could be some encouragement to get someone to be willing to take that next step?
Well, I think it's about setting realistic expectations, right? So understanding what is my vision, what do I want, and what do I need. So I'm, not at all advocating people just walk away from life and go, open an art studio if you don't have the means to do that.
Yeah.
But really kind of evaluate the goals that I set. Are they the right ones? Yeah. If they are, how do I achieve them in a meaningful way? I am a real advocate of taking quiet time and being with yourself and really exploring what is it that makes me tick. Up until March, my quiet time was on the train, like literally sitting on the train, maybe listening to music or reading or catching up on my email. But I never had time to just sit and be. And now even before I retired from Comcast, but in that window, that March to August window, having that, I can get up in the morning, make a cup of coffee, sit quietly on the porch and do nothing and just think and get in touch with what's important. And then doing that, I will be honest, the answers are a lot easier. There's a lot less struggle. But there are realities to life, right? So I think you have to understand what is your financial plan? What do you want and what do you need and what's enough? And I think that was maybe the question that ultimately my husband and I were able to answer is what's enough. I had a plan to work for 4 more years and there was absolutely a financial basis for that. Wow. And we did the math and said, yeah, that's nice, but we have everything that we need. And so let's now decide what's right for us and what we want to do. And we have this window and this opportunity to do it. So it is very personal. It is for each individual, but spending your days doing something that doesn't bring you meaning or joy can be draining. It can cost a lot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not just like physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, just feeling like you're, pushing yourself versus being compelled to, or feeling like something's so in sync. Yeah. And I know for some people that just sounds like a fairy tale. Like that seems like something that's not a reality. And that's why I love you sharing this part of your story, because it's like define success. I'm hearing you say a very fundamental, but really simple thing, which is quiet time. Taking that time in the morning to just sit and be and let yourself be, like no expectations. And I think for some of us who have really crazy demanding lives, like that might just be 10 minutes on your own, but whatever you need to do to hear your own inner wisdom speaking to you.
Yeah. And some people meditate, some people journal. It's whatever works for you. But having that time and really connecting with what's important. And the other thing I'll say is, getting to a place that you want to be doesn't necessarily require a major job shift. Sometimes it's truly a shift in perspective. And that is a lot of what I coach people on is in perspective. So the reality of your environment isn't going to change in the near term. Maybe there are opportunities, but where you are now today, how are we thinking about that? And what could be different with nothing else changing around you? And everything is about choice, everything is about really making a conscious decision of how I'm going to feel, how I'm going to be, and then what changes I'm going to make so that it doesn't feel like work to have to feel good about it. But, a lot of things that we take as givens really are choices that we're making. We're so used to it. We're not aware that we're making them.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes. It comes down to choice. And I think that's so important. I also often think about that whenever we're not happy with anything in life, I think that there's a miss between our expectations and reality. So back to what you're saying, like the two choices we have is to either change our expectations or change our reality. So if one of our realities is the job that we are currently in, and that's, the mismatch, then the choice that we have is to change our expectations and be more realistic and maybe make some of those perspective shifts, which happens internally. It may not be that obvious to other people until our behavior changes. And very often that's the work that we need to do. And it's something that we can control, which is really awesome, because many of us are seeking more control than we have these days. I think that's important. So what you're saying here is define success. What does that mean to you? And, what is informing that? You're really being curious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Being curious. And again, a lot of us, when we were kids, right? Anything you wanted to know, you just looked at it. Anything you wanted to learn about, you poked it. You just kind of explored and then and you ask dumb questions, right? But you ask them with sincerity and intent. And so as we've grown up over time, we've been told that's silly, don't say that, don't waste time, don't touch that, all the don'ts. And a lot of what I do in coaching is sort of like throw that out.
Yeah.
And ask people the dumb question. In fact, one of my instructors said his son was young and asked him, "Dad, what do you do? What do you do for your job?" And he said, "I ask really smart people really dumb questions." I was like, I kind of nailed it, yeah. But I think it is about and that kind of, what do I want? All of that is rooted in your values. Like, what's really important to you? And that's a question I ask my clients all the time. What's important? What's important in your life? What's important in this moment? What's important about that interaction? Why does it matter? And then trying to get to perspective, I'll always ask, what's the gift, right? If there's something that just feels like a miserable situation or a bad thing that happened, what's the gift? Can we find the positive in that? And it can open up a lot of new thinking that people just weren't aware of the burden they were placing on themselves. They kind of attribute it to something external, but it's the burden that we place on ourselves.
Yeah, when you were saying earlier that, we make these choices, but because we make them so frequently, we don't recognize that we have a choice. One of those could end up being a burden on us, and we don't even know that we're the thing that's in our way, or part of the problem is how we're thinking about it. To look at it as a gift and just try to, see it from another angle, like you would in hindsight. In hindsight, we think, oh, thank God that happened, because otherwise I wouldn't have had this insight. But at the moment, it certainly didn't feel like a gift.
Exactly.
Something else that you often say, Alicia, that I love, which is that everyone has a story. Like through Magnus, like we were saying, you learn a little bit about everybody's stories. Like it's almost like we're all icebergs, not in the temperature sense, but in the sense that there's so much more to us than meets the eye.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. And you mentioned Betsy Magnus. That was one of the most profound learnings I had week one was everybody has a story. And it's amazing how much people take on that you just never see, right? You can look at anyone and see, oh, they got it all together. They're perfect. They must have had an easy life. They must have everything all together. And when you really kind of peel back the layers, or you even ask a few simple questions, you'll find out that people all around are dealing with incredible challenges and incredible pain. And people, don't generally walk around talking about it, but sometime pausing to think, what might that person be dealing with could help bring a different perspective. And being able and willing to share what you're dealing with in the context of, I need help, I need support, or I want you to understand. Here's something I learned through a lot of pain, and I would like to give that as a gift to you to maybe spare you that pain. I think
the world has altered because of those life experiences. Like Chadwick Boseman comes to mind when you say that. Here, phenomenal actor that we all just admired and adored, and then you find out that he's been battling colon cancer and chemo, and you think, how in the world did he just, so sometimes you don't know, unfortunately, until after the fact that somebody has been carrying that heavy load. And then what you said earlier about courage and asking for help, I think that is another reminder that when we need someone to give us a hand, we should ask for it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times in our society, we're raised that you kind of keep that stuff inside, right? You keep it behind the front door. You don't share the things that are going on because why? I don't even know if I ever asked the why or got the answer to that, but it was just, the way I was raised was like, nobody outside needs to know anything negative that's going on here. And, I think the challenge is that it almost sort of erodes empathy. You think you're alone, and therefore you think that nobody else could ever struggle with what you struggle with. And then you think, therefore, why even reach out? I'm the only one, and I don't want to burden, or I don't want to appear to be weak, or I don't want something, it's a perception of the perception that
Yes.
really kind of gets in the way of honesty and openness and connectedness.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
And you have lived this. You've lived this exact scenario of having an amazing amount of hard times come your way,
Mhm.
and have dealt with them. You really dealt with them, and you've worked through them. Not to say you'd ever wish that on anyone, but to say
Mhm.
that it's something that is a part of who you are. It's a part of the root system that helps you to be so strong.
Mhm.
Would you mind just giving us a little bit of a background on since Jim had a heart attack a couple of years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I think, well, yeah. So it was 23 years ago. He was 40. He's now 63, doing well. But yeah, my husband, Jim, just a week shy of his 40th birthday, had a heart attack. I had a 6-month-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And I was convinced he was not going to survive. And I was convinced I was going to be a single mother. And I I really struggled. I really struggled with, how do I even do this? And then I went to a place of isolation and said, well, if I'm going to have to do this by myself, I might as well start now. And I created a distance that I, wasn't aware of at the time. I only figured this out in hindsight.
Mm.
But at the same time, I sort of recognized, like, there are a lot more important things going on in the world than whatever is the project that might be off track. I was working for Pico at the time.
Mhm.
And so I think that was sort of the beginnings of I think when you have children, naturally, you get a little bit of perspective on life. But I think that for me was like, what's really important? I don't need to worry about missing a day of work. My husband's in the hospital, those kinds of things. So that was a very dramatic kind of taking stock moment for me. He's doing fine. He's doing great. And then if you sort of fast forward, I had in a fairly short period of time, a lot of tragedy in my family. My mother died from the effects of alcohol abuse. My older brother committed suicide. And then 2 years later, my other brother committed suicide. And that was something, starting with my mother. Again, we were raised that you don't share your family secrets, you don't talk about things. And it was the not talking about it that I think ultimately resulted in the tragic end. And so coming out of that, my learning was, talk about it, even if it's hard, even if it's painful, even if you're afraid you might damage a relationship. Say what needs to be said, because you don't know. We don't know whether it could have made any difference had we spoken up sooner. But the other thing that it did was made me comfortable talking about it openly after she passed, and telling people, this was what I learned in a very painful way. I do think this is something that could have been prevented had my siblings and my stepfather and I leaned in and made demands and said what needed to be said and forced her hand. But we didn't. So if you have an opportunity, do that. And it was just a very simple, here's a thing that happened.
Yeah.
And then with my brothers, there's a lot of stigma around suicide, and telling people in my life and in my work life that my brother committed suicide was a hard thing to do. Telling them that a second time was, it was really difficult. And the two situations were very, very different. My brother, Ray, we knew he had challenges, but nobody knew the depth of his despair. Again, we knew that there were things going on, but we were a little too polite to ask. He had lost his job, but we didn't want to push and make him feel bad. So come over for Thanksgiving. We'll just pretend everything's okay. And I think in that situation, I don't know that there's anything we could have or would have done differently, but there is an element of just owning your grief. And the one thing that I remember about that, getting very personal here, my father initially didn't want to have a funeral because he was embarrassed that my brother had committed suicide. And I said, look, I'm doing it. I would love for you to participate, but I need this. And this is honoring him. And I don't really care what other people might think. And we weren't sure whether, we needed the full church because he didn't, have a lot of friends, and it was an old parish that we hadn't been in. And so we planned it. And the number of people that showed up from parts of his life that we didn't even know, and the people celebrating him just for who he was, that had nothing to do with us, really made me understand. Because when you grow up with someone, you always have this sort of sibling thing, but understand that everyone has their own life. And just because I don't see it or know it or weigh in on it doesn't mean it's not a beautiful thing, right? So it was sort of a gift of understanding how loved he was, not just by us, but by a very large community. And then the last piece, again, in this trail of tears, is my brother, Jeff. He was paranoid schizophrenic. He was mentally ill. He was suicidal for years. He had attempted suicide many times. And we tried everything we could within and outside the system, begging, pleading, bullying, tricking, lying, everything we could to try to keep him alive, even though he begged us to stop. He just didn't want to live, and we just wouldn't accept it. And so we battled, and ultimately he took his life in a fairly violent way. He jumped in front of a moving train. So there was no doubt that this was what he wanted. And the big learning for me there, and this was the hardest one, because it was so wrong and so unfair and so uncontrollable. But the thing that I really learned from that was, you can do everything possible to get an outcome that you want, and you may not get that outcome, but it doesn't mean you don't try. Nothing that my sisters and I would have done differently, because you have to try. And for every effort that you make, you may not get what you need. And that is life. That just is what it is. And but then, like, taking all of that and having my circle, my circles, my tribe, the people that support me, I really, the thing that I was so happy to shed was shame. I think a lot of people walk around with a lot of shame about things that happen in their families that they think they're not supposed to talk about. But when you take that risk and you open up and you make yourself vulnerable, you'll find out everyone has a story. And sharing something that feels personal and painful create space for someone else to do the same, and maybe a gift that they need, that they didn't know they needed.
Oh, Alicia. That took a lot, I'm sure, and teaches us so much. I mean, that is a model of what's the gift, the question that you made for your children, your mentees, what's the gift in these things that nobody would wish for, but they're happening. So how do we learn? How can we teach other people? I love that you were so willing to share this with us, because it enables us to then have the courage to share our stories with trusted people, and to look for, what did I learn from this? What did I learn? Like the taking action on behalf of the people that you care about, so you don't have regret, and knowing that even when you take all the action that you possibly can, you don't always get the result that you want, right? Some things are just frankly out of our control. And then I also love that beautiful story about Ray, and how his friends came out of the woodwork, and like how every one of us has this ripple effect that very often we don't even know. Yeah.
It's true. And that, like, just picturing that church, there was a line down the block in the church filled with people who just loved him. And that in itself was such a gift, just to know that he gave, and he got it because he gave it. He was such a loving person, and everyone had a story of something kind he had done for them. My sister and I did the eulogy together, and we did it. He was in community theater. He was very active in community theater, and we did it sort of a life in 3 acts kind of thing. And at the end, he got a standing ovation, and it was it was beautiful. It's like kind of weird to say that my brother's funeral is one of my favorite memories in my life, because there was so much love, and I think he knew it. I don't think he passed not knowing that was there. I think he just had struggles that he didn't know how to deal with, and felt that this would be better for all of us.
Yeah. So for those who are have a loved one or a friend or someone who they think could be a victim of suicide, is there any advice that you can give us? Because unfortunately, loneliness is on the rise, and the pandemic has exacerbated that trend remarkably. And which means that suicide is also on the rise. And I know that there's many of us who have people in our lives who we know could be victims of this. And also, there's also those that are so not obvious that, that it happens and you didn't see it coming. So anything you could share with us from like an activist standpoint?
I mean, I would really say there are a number of organizations. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is one that has resources that if you think someone in your life is vulnerable, that you can reach out to them and get resources. There's obviously, activities and fundraising that they do. I think probably the most important thing is ask the question. The statistics, I don't know if they're published statistics, but generally speaking, people don't commit suicide because someone asked them if they were suicidal. It's more of a preventative act than a prompt, right? So, and I think it's a really hard thing to say because there's so much stigma wrapped up in that. To look someone in the eye and say, "Are you thinking of hurting yourself?" It feels like it's a demeaning or a damaging thing to say, but it can be something that saves a life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and it doesn't have to be that straightforward. It can be, "What do you need?
Yeah.
What do you need right now? How can I help you?
Right.
Can I come over? What did you have for dinner?" It can just be a simple question of interest. But it is such a complex phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say, if you do this and this and this, you will reduce the need for someone to do that. It's so complicated. But and the other thing I'll say is the mental health system in our society is so broken. And it's very hard to get people help, and in some way I understand the reasons why, because a century ago you could be angry at someone and have them committed, and that's not okay, but it's really hard to get help for people who need it. And so I really advocate for mental health, the mental health system in general, to be more accommodating, more responsive, and better support when if there's someone in your life who is facing that, especially when they've attempted it multiple times, and there's just not enough help readily available.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And I also think that coaching is an element of that. Like when you talked about the CoActive Coaching, like the people working together actively, engaging in something that's forward looking. There's coactive parenting, coactive, sibling relationships. So how can we really be more engaged and enrolled in somebody else's story so that they know that they're not alone, have resources. And again, that's not always enough, but it's something that we can do.
Yeah. And I'll say it brings me back to that notion of people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So the thing we all want to do is show up with the answer. We want to say, if you do this, you'll be fine. If this is your problem, here's the solution. But the reality is, we don't know. You don't know. Even if someone articulates perfectly what the situation is, you don't necessarily know what the right answer is for that person. So getting curious and asking questions. What do you need? What do you want? What do you really want? What's important about that? Then you can help people uncover, here's what I really need that I didn't know that I should be asking for.
Yes.
Here's the fear that I've been carrying around that I can now recognize as not real. It's just a lie I've been telling myself. But it takes a lot of inquiry, and it takes it feels risky to ask people those questions, but to let go of what you think is the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also love too what you said about shame, and just that we all have it. And what is Brene Brown says, the less you talk about it, the more you have it. Owning it and saying, I feel really embarrassed about this, or I wish I didn't do that, or this is a part of my story that I wish I could erase. Those kinds of things are just helpful to share with the trusted folks in your life. Another thing that I think would be useful to talk about is intuition, because I'm hearing you talk about a couple of examples where your intuition you allowed to guide you, like when you were creating the org structure that you offered to your boss a couple of months ago, when you decided that you should have a funeral because you just wanted to, it's something you needed. You allowed your intuition to say, this is something we're doing. So what could you tell us about intuition and why that has fact?
Yeah. while you're spending those 10 minutes by yourself in the morning, I really encourage you to listen to what's going on and what your body and your heart and your mind are telling you. For years, I did not trust my gut. Even if I felt like I knew what was the right thing to do. I mean, I was trained as an engineer. I worked in technical organizations. I felt like you had to have the data and the argument and the rationale and the cost benefit, right? But sometimes you just know. You just know. And the hardest part is saying it out loud, right? So I think practicing saying things that feel risky, that might feel silly, and getting comfortable with it and saying, this is who I am and this is what I choose. And I don't have to really fully explain why. I mean, if you're asking someone to invest millions of dollars in something, you ought to bring some meat, right?
Yeah.
But when it's about your personal life choices, I think you really start with what is, and for me, it was about what's the universe telling me? I mean, this was really, and we talked about this, everything happens for, really truly believe everything happens for a reason. Right. And I don't believe that the coronavirus was created in order that I could retire from Comcast. I do feel like it was one of a series of things that were telling me, you need something different. Yeah. This is the right time. And so I think really, why is this happening? Just that simple question. Why is this happening? What could this mean? What might this mean? And you have that voice. We all have it. It looks different and feels different to everybody. Sometimes it's a physical sensation. It could be an emotion that you can't quite explain, a thought, a random thought that pops in your head, a visual sensation, anything. But pay attention and just kind of explore, what might that mean? Say it out loud and see what happens. I do that a lot in my coaching. If you, anybody who coaches with me, I'll just like blurt out, like, I'm seeing a little girl with a beach ball. Like, it's just weird stuff that comes up. But and it may not mean anything, but it might spark something in the other person to say, wow, you know what? It's not a beach ball, but it's like a boulder, or something.
Right.
But
it just unearthed something that wasn't present in the conversation, but you felt it. And that's what I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that you have a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering, University of Delaware, and you have an MBA from Villanova. And you have a career in energy and cable telecommunications. Like you're a analytical, very smart, intelligent woman.
Yeah.
And you're saying to us that equally as important as data is your internal data.
Yes.
Like, those are facts to you. That's real.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have a feeling that you can't let go of, explore it, pull the string, find out what is it about this that's bothering me? And it might be very different from what the thing is. The thing might just be a symbol of what it is that has to be addressed over here, but listen to it. Don't walk around uncomfortable or don't walk around in yearning that you're trying to suppress. Figure out what it is and bring it forth and then see where it takes you. And again, it doesn't have to mean a big, huge career change. It could mean a simple change in perspective. Every time this person does this, I react this way. That's my choice. What do I want to be doing right now? What about this is hurting me? What should be different here? And that's all. There's not data that's going to tell you that. That's just listening to yourself. Yeah.
And it's like you're tolerating that every single time it happens. So to say, like, I play a part in this.
Absolutely.
And allow that to get the best of me or to distract me or whatever it does. And I could decide to just play a different role in that and just see what happens. I mean, if nothing else, it's interesting to see how that changes anything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a mediation session yesterday with the client as the CEO and a direct report, and it was just fascinating to me how both of them went into the conversation with their own interpretation of reality. And then after they had the chance to share their perspectives of the exact same scenario. In fact, there was a Slack conversation that was a reference at one point. So we're looking at the same exact words, but how each of them interpreted them and how they played a part in creating the story, neither of which was true, right? It's always like somewhere in the middle is the truth. But it was so helpful to watch them go, oh, that's what you meant. Oh, that's why you behave that way. So we don't always get the luxury of unpacking it together. You're saying, like, even if you don't get the chance to do that, you can decide for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that gets down to just basic communication, right? Intent versus impact. Somebody said something, you interpret it a certain way, you have a reaction. You can just keep going back and forth with that. Or a productive thing to do is say, here's what you said, and here's how I heard it. Is that what you meant? And then sort of go from there, because often if the impact was negative, that's not really what the person intended. But if you walk away with that story, then that's just going to build on itself. So again, I think it's all just about openness and communication and asking the question, even if it feels a little risky, asking the question.
Yes. And when people do that with me, I always feel such a relief that, especially if the impact was so different than what I intended. Right. And then I can explain and apologize and own that. Like, maybe when I text something like this, or when I say something like this, it does sometimes sound like this other version of what I meant to say, that, so it's good feedback, but it also makes me feel so much more trust with that person, because I think not only did they not have to carry that around, but the fact that they felt like they could bring it to my attention is very, I don't know. I always feel so positive about that.
Yeah. And that's back, I don't know if you've done Send Delaney, this years and years ago at Pico, easily 20 years ago, we did. Send Delaney has this sort of leadership development program. And one of the elements of that was assume innocence, right? So when, if you walk around assuming that everyone's trying to insult you, everything will be an insult. If you assume that everyone's intent is good, then you'll find the positive thing, right? I don't know if it kind of.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And I had a participant one time, have a different point of view. And she said, that you can't always assume positive intent. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe not. But I think we can assume that we need more information.
Right. Yeah. Right? And even if that assumption is wrong, if you start with that assumption, it creates space. Brene Brown talks about it as assume everyone's doing the best they can.
Yes.
You really, truly believe if God came down and told you everyone is in fact doing the best they can, how would things be different for you? And it's profound.
It is so profound. Yes. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I want to ask a minute about home brewing so that we can just learn and admire this hobby of yours. And then I want to close with just some practical tips and reminders of how people can be more resilient and courageous on their journey. So home brewing.
Okay. Home brewing. Yeah. My husband and I have been home brewing for over 10 years now. And we started with a kit. I didn't know what to get him for Christmas, so I bought him a little kit and a pot and a bucket. And then we did that for about a year or so. And then we graduated to recipes where we would get the ingredients ourselves. And then we started designing our own recipes. We've been competing in sanctioned competitions for, I'd say, at least 7 or 8 years. And often we do win, place. But it's mostly about, it's mostly about the feedback, getting feedback from experts on how I can make my beer better. But we love beer. We love to brew. We're not entertaining as much. So we did have to dump some because it wasn't moving out of the kegs fast enough. But I'm a proud beer snob and a successful home brewer.
So what are you brewing these days?
Yeah, we were going to do it yesterday, but I think we might do it later in the week. And I think it's a pale ale. We kind of got to keep our baseline, but our sexiest beers are a chili ale, which has Darabal and Chipotle chilies in it.
My God.
And we do a milk stout, which often wins.
Yes. Oh, what are we brewing? Beer. Okay, yeah.
Oh, I thought she was asking me what kind of beer. Yes, we're brewing. It's all about the home brew beer.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. Chili.
Yeah, it's really good. If you
coming up on that season now, going into the fall.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for sharing that with us. And what a fun hobby.
It is fun. We enjoy doing it together, and we're part of a brew club that is, part of my extended family. It's a group of families that socialize together, and we also brew. But it's very much around the social engagement. And they're coming up on. It's now pumpkin beer season, so every year they do a pumpkin beer that massive amounts of and enjoy together.
I'll send you a link. There's always a Kennett Brew Festival every year. This year, Kennett Brew Festival Home Edition.
I like it. I like it. Yeah,
So it should be an interesting thing to join.
We went to Brewfest and then it got too crowded, so we stopped going. So.
Yeah, oh, totally. So just some key takeaways, some things that you want everyone who's joining us to just remember. There's so many nuggets of wisdom that you shared with us.
Sure.
Takeaways.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think number one thing is really spend time understanding what it is that you want, how you personally define success, and then figuring out the kind of where am I now and what's the path to get there. Spending time with yourself and really understanding what's important in my life, what's important right now. Making connection. Even if it feels a little awkward, reach out to someone and say, I'd love to have coffee. What you said was interesting. We have something in common. We have a mutual friend, whatever is the thing to really make that connection. And the more people you get to know, like that's just like kind of builds everyone up. I think I used to kind of frame it in terms of how that can help you ultimately in your career. I think the value is right there today. I don't think it has to necessarily, those gifts come later and they come naturally. I think when you make connection with people, and then say what needs to be said, whether it's help that you need, whether you see someone struggling. I think just take the risk to open up, and you'd be amazed what can happen.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. And that quiet time, I think that's a really practical call to action for all of us, to take that quiet time, hear yourself, hear your inner wisdom, write it down or tell someone else, or just sit with it. Be curious. I love how you talked about questions, those questions, like, what am I noticing? What might be a reason that's happening? Really that curiosity of knowing. And then another thing you said is about choice. We have a choice, and part of our career path or our life path even still is about the collection of the choices that we're making.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are new choices we want to make starting tomorrow? Or right now,
Yeah.
I remember reading a book years ago called Until Today. And it was so helpful because it was all of this great insight. So for anybody who's hearing this, that today, I should have done this, I should have done you did what you did, and that is over. Starting now, until today, I didn't know that I should have a couple minutes of quiet time to myself, just to be every day. And block and tackle that, right? For all of us to just be willing to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing all of this story and this wisdom with us, and for encouraging us to keep writing our own stories and really respecting other people's stories. So thanks for everybody for joining us live, and those are watching on replay. I'll send you a couple of links, including how to find Alicia. Alicia, can you just close with telling us how they can find you?
Sure. My website is Daugherty.com. So and spelling's right there. And the email is Alicia@Daugherty.com. And
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So Nani just wrote, living a life of purpose, be still, reflect, and ask why. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
It says amazing. And Robin says, thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I really enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, it was so much fun. All right. Be well, everybody. We'll see you next week.